January 24th, 1989. Outside Florida State Prison, hundreds of people gathered before dawn. They brought lawn chairs. They brought coolers. They held signs that read, "Bundy Barbecue," and "Tuesday is Friday." A man in a chef's hat pretended to flip burgers. Someone set off fireworks. A local butcher drove up in a van and sold commemorative T-shirts from the back. Inside the prison, a man sat in a small cell, making phone calls. He had been making calls all night, to detectives, to lawyers, to investigators from 7 different states. He was talking fast now, giving names, giving locations. 30 confessions in his final hours, each one a life that had ended in a way most people cannot bring themselves to imagine. He had kept those secrets for over a decade. Now he was trading them for time. One more day, one more week, one more appeal. Anything to stay alive. At 7:16 in the morning, Theodore Robert Bundy was strapped into an oak chair, and the state of Florida sent 2,000 volts through his body. He was 42 years old, and when the announcement came, the crowd outside cheered like it was New Year's Eve. Most people who hear the name Ted Bundy think they know this story. The handsome law student, the charming smile, the monster hiding in plain sight. But knowing the ending is not the same as understanding how it happened. How an entire country looked directly at evil for years and didn't recognize it. How trained investigators missed it. How a woman who studied criminal behavior for a living worked beside him for months and never felt a thing. That is the part of the story that should keep you up at night. Because if they didn't see it, the question you have to ask yourself, honestly, is whether you would have. To understand Ted Bundy, you have to start with a lie. Not one of his many lies to police, to girlfriends, to the women he lured into his car. The very first lie. The one told to him. Theodore Robert Cowell was born on November 24, 1946, at a home for unwed mothers in Burlington, Vermont. His mother, Eleanor Louise Cowell, was 22 years old and unmarried, a source of deep shame in post-war America. Eleanor's parents devised a solution that was common in those years and devastating in ways nobody measured. They would raise the baby as their own son. Ted would grow up believing his grandparents were his parents, and his mother was his older sister. It was the kind of lie families told in the 1940s. The kind nobody questioned. And for years, it held together. The family moved to Tacoma, Washington when Ted was small. His mother married a man named Johnny Culpepper Bundy, a kind, quiet hospital cook who gave Ted his surname but never quite reached him. Ted was polite. Ted was shy. Ted got good grades. The neighbors would later remember him as a nice boy. A little withdrawn, maybe. A little too quiet. But nice. What the neighbors didn't see was Samuel Cowell. Ted's grandfather, the man he believed was his father, was by most accounts a terrifying presence. He kicked dogs. He beat his wife. He swung cats by their tails and raged at anyone who crossed him. Family members described him as a bigot and a bully who held the household in a grip of unpredictable fury. Ted would later tell interviewers that he admired his grandfather, that he remembered him fondly. That disconnect between what the family described and what Ted claimed to feel would follow him for the rest of his life. And then there was the matter of the knives. Ted's Aunt Julia would tell investigators a story she never forgot. When Ted was 3 years old, she woke up from a nap to find the toddler standing beside her bed, smiling. He had gone to the kitchen, taken every butcher knife he could carry, and arranged them in a neat line on the blanket beside her sleeping body. Nobody called a doctor. Nobody called the police. It was 1949. People didn't do that. Ted grew up in a world of surfaces. Clean lawns. Pressed shirts. Family secrets buried so deep, that the truth became indistinguishable from the performance. He attended church. He joined the Boy Scouts. He earned merit badges. And somewhere along the way, he learned, earlier and more completely than almost anyone, that what people see and what is real are two entirely different things. That lesson became the foundation of everything that followed. Ted Bundy discovered his true identity, that his sister was his mother, that his parents were his grandparents, that his entire childhood had been built on a fabrication sometime during his late teens or early 20s. The details vary depending on who tells the story. Some accounts say he found his birth certificate himself, buried in family records. Others say a cousin told him during an argument, using the truth as a weapon. What is consistent across every version is that Ted never fully discussed how it made him feel. He sealed it off. He compartmentalized it. And that ability to separate what he felt from what he showed the world became the most dangerous skill he ever developed. At the University of Washington, Bundy studied psychology. He was smart, but not extraordinary. Handsome, but not striking. What set him apart was something harder to define, a quality people consistently described as magnetic. He made you feel like you were the only person in the room. He remembered your name. He asked about your day. He looked you in the eye in a way that made you trust him instantly, without knowing why. He fell in love with a woman named Stephanie Brooks. She was everything Ted aspired to be, from a wealthy San Francisco family, poised, confident, comfortable in a world that Ted desperately wanted to enter. She liked him, but she sensed something missing. She thought he lacked direction. She ended the relationship and moved to California. That rejection did something to Ted Bundy. Whether it cracked something open or simply revealed what had always been there underneath, nobody will ever know for certain. But what came next was a transformation so complete that the people who knew him before and after could barely reconcile the two versions. Ted cut his hair. He changed how he dressed. He enrolled in law school at the University of Utah. He threw himself into Republican politics in Washington state, volunteering for campaigns, attending fundraisers, working phone banks. The party leadership noticed him. The governor's office noticed him. Here was a clean-cut, articulate, ambitious young man with a firm handshake and an easy smile. The kind of person you'd want running for office someday. The kind of person you'd want your daughter to date. During this same period, he took a volunteer position at a crisis hotline in Seattle. Late nights, difficult calls, people on the edge. His co-worker on many of those shifts was a woman named Ann Rule, a former police officer who was trying to break into true crime writing. Ann thought Ted was one of the kindest, most empathetic people she had ever met. She trusted him completely. She would later write a book about him called The Stranger Beside Me. The title tells you everything you need to know about what it means to trust the wrong person. And then, in what might be the most chilling act of psychological revenge ever documented, Ted reconnected with Stephanie Brooks. He had remade himself into exactly the man she had wanted him to be. Confident, driven, polished. She fell in love with him all over again. This time, she was the one who was certain. She talked about marriage. She talked about their future. And Ted Bundy, having proven to himself that he could win her back, stopped returning her calls. He simply vanished from her life. The rejection was deliberate, calculated, and total. He had gotten what he needed, proof that he could control someone completely, bend them to his will, and then discard them. It was during exactly this period that young women in the Pacific Northwest began to disappear. In January 1974, a 21-year-old student at the University of Washington vanished from her basement apartment. Her door was unlocked. Her bed was soaked in blood. A month later, Another student disappeared from a college campus 60 miles away. Then another. Then another. All of them young. All of them attractive. All of them with long dark hair parted in the middle. A detail that would haunt investigators for years. All of them gone without a trace. The police had no suspects. No witnesses. No crime scenes that yielded useful evidence. Only absence. Missing person flyers went up on campus bulletin boards and telephone poles. Faces stared out from grocery store windows. Families held press conferences, begging for information that never came. An entire region lived in a state of slow mounting dread. Then came July 14, 1974, Lake Sammamish State Park, east of Seattle. A hot Sunday, the kind of day that fills every public beach in Washington. 40,000 people were there that afternoon, swimming, grilling, throwing frisbees. And in broad daylight, in the middle of that crowd, 2 women vanished within 5 hours of each other. This time, there were witnesses. Multiple people, at least 7, reported seeing a handsome young man with his arm in a white sling, approaching women and asking for help loading a sailboat onto his Volkswagen. He was polite, he was good-looking. He introduced himself as Ted. Ted. The name was out. The description circulated. A composite sketch ran in every newspaper in the Northwest. And when Ann Rule, the crisis hotline volunteer, the aspiring crime writer, saw that sketch, her stomach dropped. She picked up the phone and called the police. "That looks like Ted Bundy," she said. "A man I know, a man I trust." They took her information and added it to a pile of 3,000 other tips. Ted Bundy's name sat in a filing cabinet for months, while more women disappeared. But what happened next, no one could have predicted. What nobody understood yet, what would take years in multiple states and dozens of victims to piece together, was that Ted Bundy was doing something serial killers were not supposed to be able to do. He operated in daylight. He operated in crowds. He didn't lurk in parking garages or break into homes. He walked up to women in public, in the middle of the day, and asked for help. A cast on his arm, a stack of books too heavy to carry alone, a tire that needed changing. He exploited the single quality that holds civilization together, the willingness of strangers to help each other, and he turned it into a weapon. Every act of human kindness became a potential death sentence. By fall of 1974, Bundy had enrolled in law school at the University of Utah, and the disappearances moved with him like a shadow. Young women vanished in Utah, then Colorado, then Idaho. The geography shifted, but the profile stayed the same. Young, attractive, dark hair, college age, gone without a trace. Investigators in different states were chasing what they believed were separate killers. A detective in Seattle had his file. A detective in Salt Lake City had his. A detective in Colorado had his. None of them talked to each other, not because they didn't care, but because the system didn't exist. The FBI's database technology was primitive. There was no national framework for connecting cases across state lines, no centralized clearinghouse for missing persons, no protocol for recognizing that the same hand might be at work in 3 or 4 jurisdictions at once. It was the 1970s, and American law enforcement was a patchwork of local departments that guarded their cases the way small towns guard their secrets. The dots were all there. Nobody had drawn the lines between them. In August 1975, a highway patrol officer in a Salt Lake City suburb noticed a tan Volkswagen Beetle driving slowly through a residential neighborhood at 2 in the morning with its headlights off. He pulled the car over. The driver was calm, cooperative, well-spoken. His name was Ted Bundy. In the passenger seat, the officer found a ski mask, a crowbar, handcuffs, an ice pick, rope, and strips of torn pantyhose. Bundy was arrested. A young woman named Carol Duranche identified him in a lineup as the man who had tried to kidnap her months earlier. A man who had approached her in a shopping mall, claimed to be a police officer, handcuffed her inside his car, and tried to knock her unconscious with a crowbar before she fought her way out. Bundy was convicted of aggravated kidnapping and sentenced to 1 to 15 years in prison. But Colorado wanted him for murder. They extradited him for trial. And what happened next became one of the most infamous escapes in American criminal history, not once, but twice. In June 1977, Bundy was brought to the Pitkin County Courthouse in Aspen for a pre-trial hearing. He had been granted the privilege of visiting the courthouse law library during a recess. No shackles, no handcuffs, just a deputy waiting downstairs. Bundy opened a second-floor window, looked down at the 20-foot drop, and jumped. He twisted his ankle on landing, but he ran. For 6 days, he hid in the mountains above Aspen, broke into a cabin, stole food and clothing, and tried to steal a car. He was recaptured on a road outside town, cold and limping. Anyone would have assumed that after a prisoner jumped out of a courthouse window and spent 6 days on the run, security would double, guards would be posted, privileges would be revoked. The system would learn from its own failure. It didn't. The Garfield County Jail in Glenwood Springs, Colorado, was a small facility that had never held a prisoner like Ted Bundy, and it showed. On the night of December 30th, 1977, Bundy crawled through a 12-inch square hole he had spent weeks carving in the ceiling of his cell. He had starved himself deliberately, losing over 30 pounds so his shoulders would fit through the opening. He shimmied through a crawl space, dropped into the apartment of the chief jailer, who was out for New Year's Eve with his wife, changed into civilian clothes he found in a closet, and walked out the front door into the Colorado night. By the time the guards noticed his bed was stuffed with books and clothing, 15 hours had passed. Ted Bundy was already on a Greyhound bus heading south. He arrived in Tallahassee, Florida on January 8, 1978, after days of buses and stolen cars. He rented a small room in a rooming house near the Florida State University campus under the name Chris Hagen. He had no money. He had no plan. He had no identity beyond the one he was inventing hour by hour. He was a fugitive from a murder charge in Colorado, a convicted kidnapper in Utah, and a suspect in more disappearances than any single detective had yet counted. He was unraveling. And within 1 week, he committed the most violent attacks of his entire life. On the night of January 15th, Bundy entered the Chi Omega sorority house through an unlocked back door. It was a Saturday. The house was quiet. Most of the residents were asleep. In less than 45 minutes, he moved through the building with a wooden club, attacking 4 women in their beds. Margaret Bowman, 21, was beaten and strangled. Lisa Levy, 20, was beaten, strangled, and bitten. 2 other women survived with devastating injuries, fractured skulls, broken jaws, permanent hearing loss. The violence was frenzied, nothing like the calculated abductions in Washington and Utah. The mask had come off. Bundy was no longer a predator operating with surgical precision. He was a man in free fall. Blocks away, that same night, he attacked another woman in her apartment. She survived, barely. Tallahassee police had multiple crime scenes, traumatized witnesses, and a city in panic. But they had no suspect. Bundy was living under a false identity, using the name Chris Hagen and spending his days in the university library, blending in with the students as if nothing had happened. He stole wallets, shoplifted food, and drifted through Tallahassee like a ghost in a college town. Nobody looked at him twice. 3 weeks later, on February 9th, he crossed a line that even his own later confessions treated as something different. He drove to Lake City, a small town 100 miles east of Tallahassee, and abducted 12-year-old Kimberly Leach from the grounds of her middle school. It was morning. It was a school day. A teacher saw a man leading the girl toward a white van in the parking lot and thought nothing of it. Kimberly was his youngest known victim. Her remains were found 2 months later in an abandoned hogshed 35 miles away, beneath a layer of leaves and debris. 6 days after Kimberly Leach disappeared, a Pensacola police officer on routine patrol noticed a stolen orange Volkswagen. He pulled it over. The driver gave a false name, then bolted from the car and fought. The officer took him to the ground. The man was Ted Bundy. And this time, the running was over. The trial of Ted Bundy for the Chi Omega murders opened in Miami in June 1979. Judge Edward Coward made a decision that changed American jurisprudence. He allowed television cameras into the courtroom. It was the first murder trial in United States history to be broadcast nationally. Every major network carried it. Millions of Americans watched from their living rooms, and what they saw was something nobody, not the prosecutors, not the legal experts, not the journalists who had covered crime for decades, was prepared for. Ted Bundy fired his defense team and announced he would represent himself. He stood at the defense table in a well-tailored suit, his hair neatly combed, legal pads arranged in front of him like a real attorney preparing for a real case. He cross-examined witnesses with composure. He raised objections that were, by most legal accounts, competent. He argued motions with the confidence of someone who had spent years studying the law, which of course he had. He smiled at the jury. He was unfailingly courteous to the judge. The word that appeared in newspaper coverage more than any other was charming. The prosecution's most powerful evidence was a bite mark on the body of Lisa Levy. Forensic odontologist Dr. Richard Souviron testified that the wound pattern matched Ted Bundy's dental impressions with near certainty. The defense attacked the science. Bite mark analysis was relatively new in 1979, and its reliability was an open question. Bundy himself stood and challenged the methodology, questioned the chain of evidence, suggested contamination. And this is where the trial forced the entire country into a space that nobody wanted to occupy. Because watching Ted Bundy in that courtroom, watching him think on his feet, push back against testimony, command the attention of every person in the room, people felt something they did not want to feel. Not sympathy, not admiration. Something worse, confusion. The prosecution said this man crushed a woman's skull while she slept and bit into her flesh. The defense, this same man standing 10 feet away from the jury in a pressed suit, argued calmly and articulately that the science was flawed and the state had not met its burden. Both of those things existed in the same room at the same time. And the fact that a human being could contain both the violence and the composure was the thing that made the Bundy trial unlike any trial America had seen before. Evil is supposed to look like evil. That is the contract we make with ourselves so we can sleep at night. Ted Bundy broke that contract, and nobody has figured out how to repair it since. Then came the moment that left even veteran court reporters speechless. During the penalty phase, Bundy called Carol Ann Boone to the witness stand. Boone had been writing to Bundy in prison, visiting him regularly, and publicly declaring his innocence. On live national television, in the middle of his own capital murder trial, Ted Bundy asked her to marry him. Under an obscure Florida statute, a declaration of marriage made before a judge in open court was legally binding. Boone said yes. The judge froze. The jury stared. A man facing the electric chair for beating 2 women to death had just gotten married during his own sentencing hearing, on camera, in front of the entire country. The jury deliberated for less than 7 hours. Guilty on all counts. 2 death sentences. Judge Cowart looked down at the defendant and said something that would be quoted for the next 50 years. "Take care of yourself, young man. I say that to you sincerely." It's a tragedy for this court to see such a total waste of humanity. You're a bright young man. You'd have made a good lawyer. I'd have loved to have you practice in front of me. But you went another way, partner. Take care of yourself. A judge who had just sentenced a man to death, telling him he wished they had met under different circumstances. It may be the most American sentence ever spoken in a courtroom. A second trial followed in Orlando, the murder of Kimberly Leach. This time, Bundy accepted his attorneys. They mounted an insanity defense. The jury rejected it in 8 hours. A third death sentence. Ted Bundy spent nearly 10 years on Florida's death row. During those years, Carol Ann Boone gave birth to a daughter, Bundy's child. Though prison officials maintained that conjugal contact was impossible, Boone eventually stopped visiting. She moved away, changed her name, and never spoke publicly about Ted Bundy again. As his execution date became final, Bundy did what he had always done best. He negotiated. He began offering confessions to murders across 7 states, giving detectives details only the killer could know. In his last 24 hours, he spoke to investigators from Washington, Oregon, Utah, Colorado, Idaho, and Florida in rapid succession, confessing to at least 30 murders. Some investigators believe the true number is far higher. He gave some families answers they had waited years for. But he left many more in the dark, either because time ran out or because withholding the truth was the last form of control he had. His final interview was with James Dobson, the evangelical broadcaster. On camera, Bundy blamed pornography for leading him down the path to murder. He spoke softly. He seemed reflective, almost remorseful. Nearly every criminologist and behavioral analyst who reviewed that tape reached the same conclusion. It was a performance. One last audience. One last manipulation. Ted Bundy, in his final hours on Earth, was still trying to control the narrative, still trying to make someone believe him, still playing the role. The morning of January 24th, 1989, was cold and dark. Inside Florida State Prison, Ted Bundy ate his last meal: steak, eggs, hash browns, toast, and orange juice. He barely touched it. He had spent the night alternating between confessions and desperation, calling attorneys, calling investigators, trying to buy himself another week. The governor refused to intervene. The courts had exhausted every avenue. There were no more delays. At 7:16, the executioner pulled the switch. The lights in the prison dimmed, a telltale sign of the electric chair drawing current from the grid, and the crowd outside erupted. Strangers hugged. People sang. Someone held up a frying pan. A radio station across the street played "On Top of Old Smoky." A reporter asked a woman why she had come. She said, "I wanted to see justice done." But justice is a complicated word. When a crowd celebrates a death with the same fervor fans bring to a championship game. And that morning in Starkey, Florida, raised a question that America has never comfortably answered. When does punishment become spectacle? And what does it say about us when we can't tell the difference? Ted Bundy changed criminal investigation in ways that are still being felt. His case helped build the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit. The term serial killer entered the American vocabulary in part because of him. Cross-state law enforcement cooperation, forensic evidence standards, victim identification protocols. All of it was reshaped in his wake. In 2026, 37 years after his death, DNA technology confirmed Laura Ann Aim as one of his victims, a young woman who vanished in 1974 and whose family waited half a century for an answer. That identification reminded the country that there are still names we do not know, still families waiting by phones that may never ring. But the legacy that cuts deepest is not about forensics or law enforcement. It is about trust and rule. The crime writer, the former police officer, the woman who shared overnight shifts with Ted Bundy at a suicide hotline, spent the rest of her career trying to explain how she had missed it. She was trained. She studied criminal behavior. She looked into his eyes week after week and saw a kind, empathetic man who cared about people in crisis. She was not naive. She was not careless. She was simply human. And Ted Bundy had built his entire existence around exploiting exactly that. Every generation believes it is better at spotting the lie than the one before it. Better technology, better profiling, better awareness. And every generation learns the same lesson that Ted Bundy taught on a sunny afternoon at a crowded lake in 1974. That the most dangerous person in any room is never the one who looks dangerous. It is the one whose arm is in a sling, the one who needs your help with something small, the one who smiles and tells you his name and makes you feel, for just a moment, that the world is full of decent people doing decent things. We tell ourselves we would see it, that something in his eyes would give it away, that we would feel the chill that Ann Rule never felt, hear the alarm that Carol Durant heard almost too late, sense the truth that Carol Ann Boone refused to see until long after she had given it a daughter. We tell ourselves that because the alternative, that evil can look like your neighbor, your colleague, your friend, is not a thought any of us can carry for very long. And yet that is exactly what Ted Bundy proved for over a decade, across 7 states, to at least 30 women who trusted a stranger for 5 seconds and never came home.